What's up, mi gente? All right, Rebecca is here earthly, so let me accept her. You are tuned in to La Jefa Hour. Rebecca in here. Hi, everybody. How are you? I hope you're having an amazing week. Hi.
Hey, girl, how are you?
How is Chicago?
Chicago it's hot. I'm loving it. We're having an extension of the summer. You know, I love the heat, so.
I love it. I love it. So super excited to launch this digital series with my fellow Bori and hermana, Rebecca. And Rebecca and I were talking a couple of weeks ago about coming together, partnering, doing some more IG lives because the ones that we've done in the past, we've gotten some really good feedback on.
Yeah.
And so we wanted to kind of bring this back to the platform, to our audience. And we wanted to be specific, especially since Hispanic Heritage Month is going on right now.
Which you and I celebrate all year long.
All year long.
It's like Hispanic Heritage Year.
Exactly. All year round, 365, 7 days a week. And so we wanted to put together this mini digital series where we are really targeting Latinas who are obsessed with living life on their own terms, right? But our Latino brothers are welcome to join in on the conversation and tap in and put your comments in and all that jazz. But we wanted to just provide value.
Yes.
And just educate and kind of lend our expertise and hopefully help you guys continue to live the life of your dreams and most importantly, on your terms.
That's right.
So do you want to tell them about today's topic?
Sure. So today we are talking about showing up authentically and why it matters. And y'all know how I am. I'm not just about throwing out broad concepts. Victoria and I are going to definitely give you some how we've done it, what we've learned from our journey and our experience, because that doesn't really happen quite often in public forums and spaces in terms of, you know, learning the shortcuts.
Yes.
Algunas veces aprendemos, we learn through the cantazos, and I know I did. And having this space, this public forum to share what we've learned on just the importance of showing up as your authentic self. We hear that a lot. And, but before we dive in, definitely want to talk about what has happened in the Caribbean with Hurricane Fiona. As Boricua leaders in our respective spaces, we want to encourage everyone to do what you can to help with the relief efforts. And I know on the top of my link tree in my bio, there is a link for donations that are going to go straight to the people that need it. It's not going to the government. I know that there's a lot of concerns, especially after what happened with Hurricane Maria.
Yes.
And how the resources were held up by the government and were not distributed, you know, efficiently. That's not the case this time. We learn, we live and we learn. And so just know that that place where you can donate at the top of my link tree is a very reputable place to donate to. And of course, our hearts and our prayers and our thoughts and our, like, I've just been obsessed since Sunday thinking about, number one, my family. Do you still have family on the island?
I do. And they're kind of scattered throughout the island. Thankfully, everyone is okay. How about your family?
They're good. Everyone's fine. I finally was able to catch up with everyone the day before yesterday. Everyone's accounted for. It's just, there's no electricity. And I saw a stat that 90% of the Dominican Republic right now has electricity, while only 15% of the island of Puerto Rico has power. So yeah, the need is really great. And they're just going to need all the Latinos in the diaspora, whether you're born there and raised there, born and raised here, to really, really support the efforts that are ongoing. And I will continue, and I know you've been doing this too, Victoria, sharing on your stories as we're learning about different charities, because giving to charities is something that's very personal for people. They want to give to charities that they feel connected to. Maybe it's in the pueblo where they grew up. Maybe it's clothing, maybe it's food, maybe it's roofs, whatever it is, but we will continue to share. So before we, you know, dug deeper into the subject, I wanted to make sure that everyone in our respective communities knew that what we're doing to support.
Yes, absolutely. And we can't talk about Latinidad without addressing what is going on with our brothers and sisters on the islands. So we wanted to make sure to provide those resources. So stay glued to our stories. As Rebecca said, she has in her link tree a number of organizations for you to donate to, and, you know, encourage your friends, your family in and outside of the Latino community to help, because we need all the help that we can get. So we wanted to start with that. And, you know, you said something which I think is a great conversation starter for our topic today. And our topic today is Latinidad, right? Why it's important for you to remain authentically true to who you are, right? And really embrace your cultura and bring it to the forefront, both in your personal life and your business life. By the way, guys, make sure to share this live and comment done, because we want to get as many people in here as possible. This is a new digital series for us. And
it's an important conversation.
Right. And it's a very important conversation. So please, you know, share this out and comment done. So you had mentioned something about the, and I hope I'm saying this right, the diaspora, ¿cómo se dice?
Diaspora, lo dijiste bien.
The diaspora. Like, what exactly does that mean?
So it's interesting because the first time I heard that term, because I'm married to an African-American man who went to an HBCU. And I remember him mentioning early on when we were married, Black people on the diaspora. And I'm like, ¿qué es eso? And it's basically we're as a people of color and our origins of our ancestors, where we land, whether we are in our homelands, whether we are, well, it's mainly focused on people that didn't, you know, are away from their homelands of their ancestors. And so there's this creative tension that exists amongst our people where we feel less Latina, Latino, Puerto Rican, Mexican, fill in that blank, because we weren't born and raised in our countries of our ancestors' origin. But although I wasn't raised in Puerto Rico, I feel deeply connected. It's essential touchstone in my identity of being Puerto Rican. It's funny because some people get heartburn over those government, those applications where you have to fill out your race and your ethnicity, and they're like, pero there's not, you know, Hispanic, Latinx, Latine. I'm like, I don't care about all those terms. I'm Puerto Rican. So when people ask what I am, I tell them I'm Puerto Rican. So it's very central to my identity, even though I wasn't, I'm in the diaspora. I was not born and raised in the country of my ancestors' origin. So that's what thank you, because sometimes we use jargon that is very familiar to us, but then those of us who are listening are like, ¿qué? Let me Google that. What is that?
Right. No, because to your point, I've heard the term used in the Black community, right? And it made sense. And recently I started hearing more and more about like the Latino diaspora. And I'm like, what exactly does this mean? So thank you for explaining that, which I think is a good segue, because when we talk about Latinidad, you know, within our community, we sometimes are passing judgment on each other because we weren't born on the island, because we're on mainland, or because we don't speak the language fluently. And so therefore,
language is the key one too.
Yes, you're not Latino enough. So let's talk about that, because I know for me, I am fluent in Spanglish. Fluent, okay? I can write it, I can talk it, all of that. Pero I understand the language very well, but when I speak, it's broken Spanish, right?
Yeah.
And I know for me, there's been moments where I've been in rooms where I felt the judgment from my own people, like, oh, pero you're not Latino enough. You don't even speak the language. And I know I'm not alone in that, because I know a lot of people, right, who are fluent in Spanglish, just like me. So let's talk about that a little bit, because I think that there's a lot of definitions to Latinidad, but the one thing I would like to drive home is you get to define it for yourself, right? What do you think about that?
I absolutely love it. I think that, and here's the thing, we create the lives that we want for ourselves. Just because things exist the way that they are, have been the way they've been, doesn't mean that they have to continue being that way. And so that's why when I started creating content 2 years ago, I started putting out things that affirmed the Latinidad of those that were born and raised in the diaspora, in places outside of their homeland country, saying, you are just as Puerto Rican, as Mexican, as Colombian, whatever, as your parents, your grandparents. Eso corre por tu sangre, you know? And so, and by the way, as people of color, we have bigger fish to fry living in this country to be so divisive with each other. Yeah. We would totally be a powerful force if we didn't have that kind of judgment that we like, if there's a Latinidad barometer, you know. And so I truly believe in creating the life that you want for yourself. That, and most importantly, as a mom, I have 2 kids. They are Black and Puerto Rican, and I celebrate both their identities and cultures. I was just in New York last weekend for the HBCU football classics. Mm-hmm. And I tell my kids, I'm like, listen, and they know this. They don't even have to be told. They know this. They feel it. They know that they are both Black and Puerto Rican. And by the way, there are Black Puerto Ricans, you know, and which is why my husband loves going to Puerto Rico. And the yeah. Black Puerto Ricans come up to him, and he's like, oh, they think I'm one of them. This is awesome. But I don't speak Spanish. Sorry, guys. You know, that's what he'll say to them. But yeah, no, Latinidad is what you define it to be, so long it's not hurtful to other people's identity.
Absolutely. And I think we're all getting a straight up in your face lesson about how to respect how people are choosing to identify themselves, especially within the Latino market. I mean,
that's right.
We have Latino, Latine, Latinx, Hispanic. There's a lot of controversy within the community itself, which I believe is doing more damage than good. But yeah. The bottom line is we should allow people the opportunity to identify as they wish and not feel like we need to take on these labels unless we really identify with them.
Yeah. And, you know, and to get a little personal, it was interesting because I remember when so there's a 15-year difference between my brother and I. He's older than me. And when he first brought his soon-to-be wife to meet the family, whatever, she was born and raised in Texas. And I remember, you know, her lineage is Mexican, right? And it really rubbed people the wrong way in our family that she said, oh, I'm not Mexican, I'm Tejana or Texan, or I forgot what terminology she used. And they were like, no, pero tú eres mexicana because your parents and your grandparents. And I'm like, you know what? The fact that she has U.S. Census Bureau documents that shows, like, goes all the way back and can show that her family didn't cross a border. The border crossed them. Mm-hmm. They were Mexicanos that were born and raised in what is now Texas, but used to be Mexico. So, you know, I wish that that she was experiencing the inclusion that we are seeing more and more of nowadays. I wish she had that, you know, 30 years ago, or however long it was when she first met our family, because, you know, I think whatever you choose to identify, that's your business. And so long as it celebrates and uplifts our community and doesn't disparage others, you know, because there's a lot of those games too that happen too.
Absolutely. And I want us to dig a little deeper to that in a hot second, but I want to also acknowledge the stigma that lives in the community that we need to make sure that we are being mindful of is embracing Afro-Latinos, right? They yes. are a part of the Latinidad as well. And we all collectively, you know, need to embrace the diversity that lives within the community, right? Some would call it complexity. I would call it the beautiful part about being in the community is that it is so diverse and it is so layered. But when we talk about owning your authenticity and owning your Latinidad, the first step, to your point, right, that when we were exchanging notes, which I think is really important and speaks to, you know, an extension to what we're talking about right here, is you have to first figure out how you want to identify, like how you identify and how you want to be embraced by the world. Because if you're uncomfortable with that or you're unclear, other people will be unclear too, right?
Oh, that's right. Yeah. And, you know, and this is an exercise that I even tell my clients that I coach is who are really like lost in their careers. They don't know if they want to pivot somewhere else or whatever. It's all related, right? You have to know yourself. You have to know your history. If you want to identify a certain kind of way, find out about that culture. You know, like I was born and raised in a household where my parents always talked to me about the history of Puerto Rico and the brutality of slavery, of what happened with the indigenous people that rather kill themselves than be subject to, you know, being enslaved and all that, and just the remnants of what's happened in Puerto Rico. So it's something that I know very deeply, but I also know about the food. Mommy taught me how to cook. You know, I went to a church 4 times a week that always spoke in Spanish. I learned the language. And so there are things that we can do to double down on understanding who we are as a people. And that just gives you the confidence once you identify and communicate and say, yo soy boricua para que tú lo sepas. It's not just this blanket or the buzz phrase thing to say. It's because you truly know who you are and what the history of your people and your family is. And so know yourself, know the culture in the context of what am I going to do next? Am I going to switch careers, whatever? What are your values? Corporations and nonprofits have stated core values. Why don't you figure that out for yourself first? Have a high degree of self-awareness so you understand what does showing up authentic at work, authentic in your personal space, what does that look like?
Yes.
You can't do that if you don't know who you are and what your background and history
Absolutely. Is. And you can also set healthy boundaries, right? And show people how you should be treated if you yourself don't know how you want to be treated. So I think this is a great place for us to introduce ourselves, because I know both of our communities are getting to know each other. And we can talk about this. We'll go on and on, but let's take a moment to do that, because providing that context, I think, will help folks understand our perspectives and also our vast experience that allow us to lend these different strategies to you guys, because we've actually either offered them to our clients or have done them ourselves. So I'll go first. Victoria Jen Rodriguez. Hi, everybody. Shout out to everybody in Rebeca's amazing community, as well as my community. We're so happy to have you here. So I am a top mindset and business coach. And essentially what that means is I help women and people in general become the best version of themselves. And there's 2 ways that I do that. The first way is I teach people how to make the transition from corporate or their 9-to-5 into entrepreneurship without losing their financial security. So it's all about planning. It's all about making sure that you're setting yourself up for success before daring to leap and giving your job the deuces, right? So it's about planning ahead, being strategic, intentional. And I pinned here in the comments, DM me the word biz, and I'll send you a free training that I have, and it's yours absolutely free, which will show you the 3 steps that you can take today to start making that transition, even if you don't know what type of business to start and have only one source of income. So tap into that. And then the second way that I help people become the best version of themselves is I actually consult corporate organizations on their human capital initiatives. So their employee programs, leadership and development, their onboarding programs, coaching, etc. Because my goal with that is really advising organizations how to humanize the corporate experience. And I think we all understand how significant that is, more so now than ever. So that's me in a nutshell. Rebeca, please introduce yourself to the people.
And real quick, I just want to express to my community what a gem Victoria Jen is in our community now, because I cannot tell you the things I've observed in my 20 years of working in the nonprofit sector, in doing fundraising, interfacing with people with generational wealth. Like I've been to the house, and I'm not saying this to stunt and be like, oh, this is who I am and look at how cool I am. I've been in the home of John Walton, who's the founder of Walmart over in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. I've been a part of a fellowship where the founder of Netflix, Reed Hastings, was a facilitator, and we've been to his home to eat. And mira, yo estaba así, observando, observing what are the practices of people of privilege and generational wealth. And y'all, Victoria Jen is basically, she provides the cheat sheet, right? In terms of like, because we don't come typically from households with generational wealth, and we deserve a seat at that table too, y'all. We deserve a seat at that table. The reason why things happen, the reason why Puerto Rico is in the situation that it's in, and our people as a whole in this country, is because we don't have enough of us sitting around the tables of decisions around policy, around resources enough.
Yes.
And so what Victoria Jen offers, the thing, I want y'all to catch this because it's something that fascinated me, is like, how can you venture off and start your own business and try to create generational wealth on your own, but at the same time not go broke? People of privilege, what happens? They're trust fund babies. They get the runway to be able to start their businesses. They get investors. Who are their investors? Their family members. Their family members are their investors.
Mm-hmm.
That's how the founder of Chipotle got started. He got a loan from his daddy that obviously he paid back in full, you know, 100 times over. And so I just want to just shout out to Victoria Jen, what you do for our community in terms of like, you can start your own business. We can't do it the way that people of privilege do it because we got to straddle a little bit sometimes between the job we have and the business and the wealth we want to accumulate. So anyways, my name is Rebeca Huffman, and I'm a proud Boricua living in Chicago, born and raised. And for the last 20 years, as I mentioned, I've worked in the nonprofit sector and fundraising, board development. And 3 years ago, I started my own consulting practice where I get hired by nonprofits and foundations in supporting them with board development, with fundraising. But I also have had some one-on-one clients around helping them figure out what we were talking about earlier. What's my purpose in life? What's my North Star? You know, how do I go through these exercises to really understand who I am and advocate for the path that I want forward, the life I want to lead. So, and then of course, for those that are here that are in my community, you know that I cook. And I came to social media during the pandemic to share Puerto Rican recipes. And well, that's taken off. And I've got some brand deals and things that I'm doing on social. And on social is how I met Victoria Jen. So
yes. And got to show you your flowers, because when I came across your page, I felt so proud to be Boricua. Aww. And I was like, oh, thank you, Lord, for sending me Rebecca and coming across your page, because especially during the pandemic, there was somewhat of like an identity crisis going on. Like, who are we? What do we want to be? How do we want to show up? Like, I went through that. Everybody went through that. And there was a lot of self-reflection. And I came across your page and I was like, oh my God, I just felt this orgullo. Like, I felt like so proud.
Thank you.
And I was like, who is this woman? We got to make some magic together. And here we are making some magic together.
I love it.
This is why, another reason, it's important for you to be authentic and know who you are, because it will then allow people, like-minded people who get it, who understand, who vibe in your energy, right, and vibration, to come to you and be introduced to you, right? I'm a firm believer that the universe pays attention to that kind of stuff.
Oh, you become a magnet. When you're authentic, you become a magnet for other people that share in your values and want to work. They want to be around your aura and your energy, you know?
Yes. So in summary, guys, the first step is knowing who you are, why you are, taking the time to self-reflect, taking the time to understand what are your values. And listen, if you're kind of in the in-between right now, that's okay, because it is a process and you will constantly grow. Like, I'm still figuring out parts of me, and Rebecca, I'm sure you are too. Like, it never stops, but it's important for you to have a foundation so that you're able to build the bricks, right, on top of the foundation, and having the strong foundation. So if a strong wind comes in, or somebody tries to disrespect you, somebody tries to do whatever, you have that strong foundation to hold you down, right?
That's right.
And to continue to build on.
Another value of knowing yourself is, for instance, for those of you that are working a job and you want to make sure your employer invests in your professional development, there always comes a moment sometimes in these performance reviews where they say, okay, so what can we do to support you, you know, in your growth here in the company, right? How are you going to be able to respond to that if you don't know what you want to do next, what talents and skills you want to develop and grow into? And without them asking that question, that is a topic that should come up during performance evaluations or in typical one-on-one conversations with your supervisors. So knowing yourself and where you come from, that's the first step, as Victoria Jen mentioned, in showing up as your authentic self.
Yes. So let's go to step number 2. And step number 2 was about knowing your audience. Do you want to build on that, Rebecca?
For sure. So I know when I was younger in my career, I tried showing up as my very authentic self in those very bougie, privileged, rooms, without really truly knowing my audience. And I love my culture. I love how we speak, the warmth of our culture. I'm making generalizations. I'm not saying that everybody in our culture is like that, but for the most part, it's what we're known for. And knowing your audience is really, really important because it gives you an idea of how to talk to them and share your authentic self with them in a way that doesn't scare them, or in a way that confuses them. And so knowing your audience and where they're starting out from is really, really, really important.
I really appreciate you bringing up that point because, it's kind of one of those things where when in Rome, do as Romans do. And I don't think people understand the concept behind that. Like, and this is something I had to learn, right? My brand is all about authenticity and being comfortable in your own skin and showing off that badassery. But I've learned over the years that being able to flex your leadership style is very advantageous to getting what you want and getting people to take action on your behalf, and the ability to influence and motivate and inspire people. You will learn that there are certain ways for you to speak so that your message lands well. Like my communication style for years, and still very much so, is very straight to the point, straight to the face, no chaser. Right? But I have to be mindful.
You said no chaser. I love that.
No chaser. Take that straight to the face. But I have to be mindful that that's my style, and not everybody will be receptive to that style. And so I have to be able to flex that a little bit. And that's just about you being a smart businesswoman, a smart professional, a real leader, right? Yeah. Because in order to lead, you need to be able to influence, AKA you need your message to land. And sometimes you have to know that you have to deliver that message in a way where people are able to digest it so you can get them to do whatever it is you need to do, or for them to actually see you. And that was hard for me because I'm like, espérate, like on the one side, I'm like, I want people to gravitate towards me for me. I don't want to have to like adapt to any environment. I don't want to have to turn it down. And then on the other side, I've seen the benefit of being able to blend, being able to be received because you've been able to flex your leadership style. So that takes practice and it takes experience.
It's not an overnight thing.
Never-ending learning for me. But because of
it's working out for you, girl. It's working out for you, though.
Thank you. But because of our cultura, and I'm also from New York, like, I'm like, rah, let's get to it. Like, let's go. Yeah. Right? So there will be periods in your career where you will need to be mindful of who you are in front of and how they want to receive messages. Now, to that point, I want to add in here, that doesn't mean that you're completely turning off who you are or not being who you are. Like, there's a way for you to still be you and have a diverse communication style. Would you agree?
No, absolutely. And this is the thing, is that that's not assimilation. It's not. A lot of people, they look down on Latinos, like historically, our parents, grandparents. Sometimes you'll find stories of people saying that when they first came here, they were like, don't speak English, don't speak Spanish, just speak English. We got to blend in. What is the equivalent of that in the workspace is there's a certain way I have to talk, a certain way I have to wear my hair, a certain way I have to do my makeup, a certain way I have to dress. And so knowing your audience is important. And how do you get to know your audience? By observing and doing a lot of listening. What do presidential candidates do? Anybody that's working to be a leader in a space, they do a lot of listening at first when they're getting to know their audience. There's nothing wrong with doing a lot of observing and listening and holding back possibly what you want to say or you think you want to say. Get to know your audience. And I'll give you an example of how this has happened for me. Is I'll never forget, I was in an event one time and there was a donor that I really wanted to go after. Like, this guy, this is a huge foundation and up in Wisconsin. And this man was completely opposite of me, super privileged, white, older white man. And I overheard, I was in a circle where people were talking to him, and I overheard him talking about how his latest obsession with his daughter, his 21-year-old daughter, was watching The Hills. Remember The Hills, that show, that reality show?
I do remember that.
And I was watching that reality show during that time. And I'm like, bet, note to self. It's important when you're trying to get to know your audience to find threads of familiarity, especially if those people are in a position of authority over your career or authority over the outcomes of your work. And in that case, that's what this was. And so when I had him on a one-on-one during a networking time, I said, hey, Dan, I heard that you like The Hills. Who's your favorite character? You know, and I started talking and just bonding with him around that. A man that I thought originally I would have nothing in common with. And so that's the value of taking the time to really do a lot of listening, observing, and finding those points of familiarity with your potential audience.
Yes, I love that. The gem drops, like mic drops right now, because, you know,
somebody said you're giving away our age. Yes, I know, but it's okay. I look good for my age.
For real, for real. When I was in corporate, right? I was in corporate 15 years before I became a full-time entrepreneur 5 years ago. All of my feedback sessions were like, Victoria, Jen, you're amazing. You're an incredible asset to the team, pero we need you to tone it down a bit. Like, you're just too much, and it's making people uncomfortable. And every time I would hear that feedback, I always welcome feedback. I think feedback is a gift, regardless if you decide to act on it or not. Right. And I was like, wow, interesting. But it was at those moments where I was like, okay, I really need to figure out like how I can remain authentic to me and show up in these spaces while still making people comfortable to be around me. And it's not about you disconnecting, because you'll see the memes and they're like, who cares if you make people uncomfortable? Like, do you? Yes and no, right? It depends on your position and where you are. Because your magic will shine through anyway. Like, there's no way I can tone it down. If I'm toning it down in language, I'm turning it up some other way. Like,
that's right. That energy gotta go somewhere.
Right. There's no way to turn it down, but you just have to be smart and strategic and very intentional. Again, what is your goal? Like, if your goal is to get people to sign on, to get buy-in for something you want to do, then yeah, you're going to have to switch it up, because you want people to be readily available to sign on, right? And sign off, right, etc., without losing yourself, right? Which is what's really key and important.
That's right. Because, and then this is one thing I've seen one of your posts where you said, your value add is who you are and your culture and what you bring. Because let's keep it real, people. Like, the spaces that Latinas are entering into in positions of leadership, these people that we're interacting with, they're having to get used to us and our power and our authority and our leadership perspective. And so, yeah, it goes both ways. But it's on us really to navigate those spaces in a way, because we really truly have more to lose than they do. I mean, most of the time.
Right. Exactly. So we got to be smart and intentional. So let's talk about step number 3. And this is about ascending to roles of leadership and knowing the parameters and historical context. So I know you have a story that you wanted to share regarding HR and up as a mom in leadership. So let's kick it off.
I know that the people that are probably listening, you've been in a space at work where you see somebody that probably looks or sounds like you, a woman or a person of color or whatever. And you look at them and you say to them, why aren't they doing more to change up the environment or to bring in DEI or whatever? There's a myriad of reasons of why that could be happening and why that person might have that perspective. But it's really important that once we as Latinas, when we get into those roles of leadership and influence, that you remember that just because the way things have been the way they've always been doesn't mean that they have to continue being that way. Right. And the first thing that you have to do before you make any changes is understand the historical context and parameters of why things have been that way. I've made the mistake where I come in guns blazing. We're going to change this up. We're going to make this more inclusive. We're going to do X, Y, this, that, and the third. And I try to attempt some changes. And then HR comes around and says, well, actually, we can do this, but we can't do that because blah, blah, blah. I I could have totally shot myself or the organization in the foot if I would have gone in guns blazing. But we as Latinas, when we go into these roles of leadership, we have a responsibility to truly be the change, right? And but do it in a very methodical and thoughtful way where we don't make ourselves vulnerable to scrutiny or to harm. So you know, an example. So one of the things, a few things. I'm a mom. When I came into my last leadership role as a W-2 employee, as a CEO, is I wanted to make sure that the fellow parents that were on my staff felt that our workplace was understanding that sometimes with parents, you know, your childcare falls through and then you have to take a day off or a PTO or whatever. And so what I said is check with HR, whatever. And I said, you know what? On days that this happens to our employees, I want them to feel comfortable that they could bring their kids to work. We created a space in our office that had, you know, puzzles and coloring books and, you know, Play-Doh and all that stuff that que por si acaso. And that was a change I made. There were other changes. There's a bunch of other examples, you know, of changes that I would make, but after having gone through the appropriate channels to making sure that we can do this, you know, and that we're not violating any policies or HR, you know, things. But so that's just one of many examples of how when you ascend into those roles, find out what the context is and what change is even possible. And unfortunately, if you see yourself in a situation where, you know what, there isn't much wiggle there because it's a government agency or fill in the blank, you know, maybe that's not the place for you. And maybe your place is to be an entrepreneur so you can completely do your own thing unencumbered. And so I think it's just really important for our community to really know and understand that once you get into those roles, you have a responsibility to change, but to do it in a way that is really thoughtful and you know, advantageous to the organization as a whole.
I love that. And I have a story to share that
Dímelo.
that I always share. So my first job out of school, I was on the trading desk at Lehman Brothers before they went bankrupt. And I was working with brokers and they were all white men. I was the only Latina on the trading floor. I was also the youngest woman on the trading floor. And one day, one of the brokers was like, I need you to look up one of our client accounts. And the client account was under Joel Epstein. Now, the way that you spell Joel, Joel, is the same way that you spell my primo's name, Joel. Right? So when I go to look up the account, I bring him, you know, what I found. And I said, okay, so Joel Epstein, this is what needs to happen. And he looks at me and starts laughing. And he's like, Victoria, haha, you don't know how to read? That says Joel Epstein. Now, listen, in my community, I didn't know any Joels. I didn't know any Epsteins. Like, I knew Joel, right? And clearly, he never met a Joel in his life because he didn't know that it was spelled the same way. And so now we're on a open trading floor. So everybody hears what's going on. So now essentially everybody's laughing at me. And I'm like, ugh, like this kind of sucks, right? But I was like, you know what? Espérate, I got you. I go over to my computer. I make sure the speakers are all the way up so the entire trading floor can hear me. And I Googled how to spell and say Joel. And over the loudspeaker, it said Joel, Joel, and then it went for the definition of the name, saying that it's very common in Latino communities, etc. And all that laughter,
I love it.
Yes, all that laughter started going a little lower, right? And I share that with you because that was a pivotal moment. Like that moment could have put me in my shell. Imposter syndrome would have played all over me, and my Latinidad would have went out the window with the notion of let me fit in, put my head down, you know, let me not make a big deal out of this. But to your point about taking on the responsibility, not only to educate, but hold your own and how much power is in that. Because after we had our exchange, now he knows Joel is a name, right? And now I knew that Joel is a name. So there was learnings on both sides. And so as you are thinking about showing up authentically, understand that this will be a learning for you of other cultures as well.
Right.
Like you will need to learn how to play in a diverse world, just like you want people to play into your diverse world. And the only way that's going to happen is if you're vulnerable enough, brave enough to use your voice in moments like that, that are learnings for you and others, but most importantly, an opportunity to let people know about your culture, right? Because how are they going to know if they've never been exposed to it?
And you know what? Right there, what you did is you modeled for possibly the up and coming Latinas, junior level, you know, Hispanics, people of color, Black people, whoever, fill in the blank, that they were watching you in that moment. Mm-hmm. And by you doing that, it created a permission structure for them to be able to do that if they find themselves in that situation too. Absolutely. So really great point that it goes both ways in this day and age where people are getting more and more woke, more and more canceled, more and more fill in the blank. It's important to strive and look to the fact that this is a mutual thing. We're all learning from each other.
Right. Right. And I think also what's important to highlight is you're allowed to make mistakes on this journey of Latinidad and being able to share your culture. And you might not always get it right. You might offend some people. You know, give yourself the grace and permission to try again and show up again. Because that's the only way you're going to continue to grow and be able to, you know, level up in your Latinidad. Okay, so let's see. Step 4 is about asserting yourself and your identity, celebrating it, and creating a path for others to do the same. So I just gave a great example of how you can do that. But Rebecca, how do you want to add to that?
Well, I just think it's showing up as your authentic self. Like once you get to this point in your steps, like you've gotten more confident, you're, you know, you're being seen, you're being heard. Do it the way that, like, show up in the way that you feel is going to celebrate your culture, celebrate your identity, celebrate the Latinidad. It's little things, like, for instance, how I show up dressed to meetings, you know, there, you know, if I have one of my art by Sir pieces that shows, you know, el morro on it, but everything else I'm suited up. You know what I mean? But I get this pop of culture, you know, it's little things like that where you're showing up authentically. You're like dropping little breadcrumbs for potential conversations with people about who you are. But again, it's the people that are watching you, the people that watched you get on that mic and say, well, actually, this is the way you also pronounce this name. And so it's just really important to constantly celebrate who you are in your Latinidad, in the small and in the big ways, especially when you ascend to roles of leadership.
Absolutely. And we have to remember that our Latinidad is a competitive advantage. It actually allows us to separate ourselves from the competition, right? Because as a community, as a people, right, we're welcoming. We like to host. We like to entertain. We're embracers. We like to hug, the besito on the cheek, like, all of those things are advantageous to helping you stick out in business, helping you stick out at the office, right? And you also become more confident because you're staying true to your essence, right? To your core, to the soul of who you are. And once you are able to become one and balanced within, you will be so much more braver, so much more courageous, and so much more badass, quite frankly, in any of the spaces that you're in, that people will want to know who you are, like what you got going on. Like there's something about you.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
You walk into this room and I don't know, something is going on. Like, who are you? Right? And that's what you want, right? Yeah. And so you have to do the work to get to that place. Right? Because a lot of us are still uncomfortable in our own skin. A lot of us has imposter syndrome at play. All up over here on the side. Like I was at this event the other day, and ¿cómo se llama? What is her name? I think her name is Lupita. The Wakanda, one of the warriors.
Oh yeah.
Lupita. She gave her imposter syndrome a personality. So that whenever imposter syndrome tried to like come in her way, she would like shut her down.
Did she give it a name? Did she give imposter syndrome a name?
She gave her imposter syndrome a name, like an identity, right?
What was the name? I'm just curious. What's
I don't know what the name was, but that was her strategy.
I gotta give mine a name. What would your name be?
We gotta give the imposter syndrome a name so that when she acts up, you be like, mira, mija, I'm gonna need you.
No, it's not like mira pendeja.
Exactly, mira pendeja, colo suave. All right, I need you to calm it down.
Right.
But yeah, as you are going through, you know, your transformation and your evolution, like just pay attention to what makes you shine and play that up as much as possible. And don't try to keep your cultura at the door. You know, our parents, they were taught differently because of the colonizers who made it seem like, hey, if you show up like this, you're gonna get killed or enslaved or whatever it is. And so they were conditioned to not speak the language, and it has impacted our community, right? We are conditioned to believe that darker skin is not good. We need to be more white, right? We need to be more whitewashed in order to be accepted. And that has hurt us tremendously and has carried on to now our parents' children, just like it carried on from their parents. And so it's up to us to be the shift, to break that generational curse.
And you know, one thing that I tell my mentees or the women that I coach, and it's something, this is my husband's fingerprints right here, is he said, on my worst days as an entrepreneur, what I tell myself all the time is my problems are the answers to the prayers of my ancestors. The fact that I own a business when they couldn't, the fact that I'm dealing with, oh crap, this investor said no, and I am about to pitch another. Answer to prayers from your ancestors that you're even in a position to own a business and seek out investors. And one thing that I always have done, you know, in terms of showing up authentically as myself, is I bring my community along. You know, like I serve on boards. When I see catered food, the same rubber chicken company that they cater food from, I'm like, do you know about Diana's in Humboldt Park? They cater, you know, and we got a DEI commitment. We got a DEI, yeah. Well, they are a Puerto Rican-owned business. Or this is, you know, have you heard of such and such soul food restaurant? You know, because, you know, this is selfish too. I want the meetings that I tend to have good food.
Right.
But bring your community along. We have Latino accountants that could be hired by your companies. We have all kinds of vendors that could be used in companies and organizations that are run by people. Bring your community along, because that's what it's all about. And that's what our parents and our ancestors would want to see happen.
Yes. And I think you do an incredible job of this. You know, I take notes from you all the time, because not only was I like, oh my God, this woman makes me feel so proud, but you're fucking smart. Like, you got shit going on. You know what I mean?
Thank you.
And you are bringing the community and everything that you're doing, from you promoting the small businesses on your page, for you partnering with Carla and Co. for your shirts. Like, you literally are living and breathing what it looks like to bring your community along. So yes, when you come across people like this, like, pay attention, pick up on the best practices, and recycle, right? And you do the same thing. So we are coming to a close. This was an amazing kickoff.
I know, I love it.
La Jefa Hour. I love it.
By the way, yeah. Victoria Jen and I were joking when we were trying to figure out the name for this series, and I'm like, oh man, the people that don't speak Spanish, they're gonna be like, Heifer Hour? What? It's like Jefa, not heifer. Jefa.
We're not promoting any heifers on here, okay? Listen, do what you want to, pero soy jefa.
That's right.
Yes, I remember that. That was actually really funny. All right, so throw some hearts in the comments if you appreciate this. We are going to we're going to post this recording on YouTube. So we'll share that link for those who missed it, or if you want to share this with your family and your friends, please do so. A lot of gems were dropped today. So let's summarize those up. So first things first, there are a number of resources on the link on Rebeca's page for you to donate and help Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic and become a part of the revolution to revitalize both of those islands. So make sure to check that out. Today we talked about your Latinidad, showing up authentically and why that's important. So let's cover those 4 steps. So step 1 is doing the work to know yourself, right? As uncomfortable as it is, like, do the work and pay attention to what's happening around you, because once you have your foundation, then other people will respond and you can teach them how to treat you. Step 2, know your audience. Know when to flex your leadership style. Know when to be flexible on your communication style. All that jazz. Step 3, once you ascend to roles of leadership, remember it's your responsibility to not only bring the community with you, but also be a representation of your cultura and your Latinidad, right? You have to educate people. And then step 4 is celebrate yourself as often as possible and believe and understand how much of a competitive advantage your Latinidad actually is. Rebecca, do you have any closing remarks for the amazing people?
I actually have an answer to the question that was asked earlier about how long is the series for. We've got 3 more lives that are going to be taking place. It's all in celebration of Hispanic Heritage Month. So next week, Tuesday, will be our next La Jefa Hour. And we will be covering a new topic at that time. So keep your eyes peeled on my stories, on Victoria Jen's stories, because the day before, or 2 days before, we will put in a question box about that topic, so that way we're being proactive and answering questions that you all actually have on the subject matter. So those are my only closing remarks, and just to encourage people to just be, it's your competitive advantage to be, to show off your Latinidad and share our culture in that way. So thank you guys for tuning in.
Yes, and on September 27th, that will be from 12:30 to 1:30 Eastern, which is 11:30, 12:30 Central Time.
That's right.
So tap into that, put it on your calendar. Let your hermanos know that this is going down, La Jefa Hour, during Hispanic Heritage Month, and we'll post the link for the replay so you can share this out. Thank you so much for joining us on the kickoff for the La Jefa Hour. Thank you to my amazing co-host, Rebeca.
Girl, get it. Boom.
Incredible.
You're awesome too, mama. Birds of a feather flock together. Dime con quién anda y te diré quién eres. Blah, blah, blah. That's how it goes.
Punto. That's it. Pero, okay. El fin. Gracias, everybody.
Bye, guys. Have a great rest of your day. Bye.